So Elise and Troy are contacting the other countries to see whether they have trouble joining the meeting. Maybe we can start with a small update from Vanuatu and Palau on the status of their report of their work. I don't know if maybe Palau, you could start, if you could update us on the status of your work in 1 or 2 minutes.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I guess I was waiting for Donna to speak up, but I guess I'll go ahead. We were having trouble merging our data. I think we've only been able to merge 1 year, 2015. So for my assignments, I decided to go ahead and just use the civil registry data. So I've only been able to do assignment 2. I'm currently working on assignment 3. I'm kind of behind, not only because we were not able to merge our civil registry data with the Ministry of Health data, but also because of my other work here in Palau. We had to complete our annual report. So that kind of kept me busy. We finally finished our annual report last week, so I'm now able to concentrate on this civil registry webinar. I don't know if we're eventually going to get our data from Ministry of Health, merging our data. Mong Udui, our epidemiologist, working on merging the data, but she's also quite busy, so I don't know if we're ever going to be able to complete merging the data. Will we be able to finish the webinar with only civil registry data? Or does it require the Ministry of Health data, like the information on infant mortality rates and all that other information from the hospital? That's a question.
Yeah, if I may jump in. I think that will depend on the completeness of your civil registration data, but I would imagine, especially once we move to mortality, that without the health data, we might not be able to do all indicators. So we'll have maybe to focus the reports on a few indicators only, and we won't be able to go too far. But I mean, you'll be able to do, I mean, most of or a lot of the reports anyways, but we'll have to see once we start looking at the completeness of your data and the information you have.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we could have an update from one of the participants from Vanuatu.
You can also write in the chat if you're comfortable with that.
Can I just, while we wait, I mean, can I just ask David, just based on the feedback from Palau there, I imagine these reports are sort of going to be somewhat living documents, and after this workshop, I'll have plenty of opportunities to update them further. You know, if it does mean, you know, Ministry of Health data is not available now, but it's available in a month's time, or so they can then keep adding to it, so forth. So not ideal, but not an issue we can't deal with.
Yeah, and we will support you after the course as well. So as Chris was saying, it's very true. If you want to make modifications after the course, we'll support you with that, and you'll have opportunities in a month or two to do it.
Okay, thank you. And I was kind of worried because it is it's a report for the country, and how can it be a report for the country if it's only reflecting civil registry data and not data from the Ministry of Health? So yes, thank you for the support.
Okay, Dave, looks like I think that's feedback from Vanuatu, is it, in the chat?
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to finalize data and we'll continue to work on our report. Okay. And do we have RMI who have joined now as well?
Yes, Yakwe everyone, this is Edlin from RMI.
Hi, Edwin. We were just asking countries if they could just give a quick, only 1 minute update on how the assignment and project work's going in your country. Are you able to just give a quick update?
We worked on 1, 2, and 3, but unfortunately it was not submitted. I will submit it today, but on the week 4, I actually have questions that I can discuss later on, if that is okay.
Okay, yeah, no, sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. So can I just check, there's a few initials there I'm not familiar. Is Kiribati and Samoa online? I take the silence meaning no. So, David, I'll put you in charge. Do you still want to start or wait 1 more minute? We're still missing 2 of our 5 countries.
I think we should probably go ahead and they join during the session.
Okay, sounds good. So let me test my IT skills again. So if someone can let me know if that looks okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, slideshow and yeah, fantastic.
All right. Okay, so let's kick off. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be your instructor again this week, and we're going to move on to module 5. It should be a little bit easier this week than last week. Last week we had about 50 slides to get through. It's only about 14 or 15 today, so we might even go a little bit slower and have a little bit more question time. So be ready to be responding to a few questions as we go along. So make sure you're paying attention. So we'll do that. We didn't have the time to do it last week, but we want to add that in this week. Just what we're talking about today is, if you recall, last week we introduced you to birth data. And we had a look at some different types of commonly produced tables around births, looking at key variables such as the age of the mother, place of birth, birth weight, and so forth. And then we had a look at a couple of commonly produced indicators, and they were the sex ratio and the crude birth rate. So today we're going to continue on that path a little bit and look at a couple more commonly produced birth indicators, and they are the age-specific fertility rate and total fertility rate. So we're going to just go through those 2 concepts. It shouldn't take much more than about 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up with just maybe a little bit of discussion on the extra assignment work that we need to move on to. So just to start off with, I mean, why? I mean, I made that reference to that term age-specific fertility rate. So why might we be interested in looking at the fertility rates for different sort of age groups? And the reason being is, you know, a woman's likelihood to give birth to a child at any sort of given age, it does get influenced by a number of factors. And the factors can include factors over time or from location to location. So I've just listed 4 examples there. There's a number of things that drives the likelihood of females giving birth at different times in their life. But some of the ones which we address in the manual, the first one relates to the availability of family planning in countries. And family planning, that's all about, you know, controlling the number of children and intervals between births a mother may have. And it's that family planning opportunity, it's not as common in some countries as it is in others, and so that will have an impact. Cultural and societal norms also has an impact. I mean, in some cultures, it's common for females to get married at a young age, which would make it more likely that they'll have children at a young age. The costs of raising children, this is sort of as an influence over time. It's becoming increasingly expensive to bring a child into the world nowadays. And you will have seen over the years the typical number of children families have now. It's a lot less now than what it was many years ago. And the cost is having an impact there. Another example is just the value of education. I mean, there's a lot more females who are valuing staying in school and well, not just completing high school, but going into tertiary. And that also has an impact of the likelihood that they might have children in their younger years. So that's just a few examples. There's plenty more, but that's just to get you a little bit of a feel that, you know, some of these outside influences do have an impact on the likelihood that a female will give birth to a child at various stages in their life. So let's have a little look at, you know, what a pattern looks like. And here we've got some data from Fiji, and there's actually 2 graphs there, and it's quite remarkable that they're so similar given they're 2 different 3-year periods. But there is a blue and red line there on that graph. And what it's showing is that the number of births that have occurred for that 3-year period for each of those 5-year age groups, and we've grouped less than 15 together and 50 plus at the end. So this is not an uncommon sort of pattern you would expect to see for most countries, well, for all countries pretty much. So you virtually get no births below the age of 15. So that's why we start off at scratch. And once again, when we get to 50 plus, there's no births. But you see the chart gradually increase when we get to 15 to 19 and then jump quite considerably when we get up to 20 to 24 and 25 to 29, which are obviously the peak years for women to give birth to a child in Fiji. And then it gradually tapers off until we get down to the 45 to 49 age group. And after that, it's a rare event for a woman to give birth. So what did surprise me when we produced this graph, that those 2 3-year age groups would be so similar, but it just goes to show that in a country like Fiji, for those 2 time periods, there's been very little difference in the pattern of childbirth by age in those 2 3-year groupings. All right, so I mentioned at the start, we're going to introduce 2 new indicators, and the first one is the age-specific fertility rate. So what that is, simply put, is just the number of births occurring to mothers of a certain age group per 1,000 women in that age group in a given period of time. Now, age-specific fertility rates, they're normally calculated in 5-year age groups, and they focus primarily on the main years a female is likely to give birth, which is 15 to 49. So normally you'll see these ASFRs, or age-specific fertility rates, going from 15 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and so forth, all the way up to 49. Now, the advantage of the age-specific fertility rates is that they're not affected by the difference in the age distribution among women of childbearing ages. So basically, it doesn't matter if you have a very young or very old population, because you're calculating these birth rates for each age group separately. So how do we calculate the age-specific fertility rates? It's fairly straightforward. So as I said, firstly, I mean, it's most common that we break the age groups down by 5-year brackets. So for the 15, and we focus on the 15 to 49 ages. So we end up with 7 5-year groupings, starting at 15 to 19, going all the way up to 45 to 49. And then from there, we just need 2 bits of information. One is what the female population is for that age group. And second, the number of births that took place for that age group for that period of time. All right, so once we've got that, then if we calculate the fertility rate, or in this case, the age-specific fertility rate, so if we focus on the 15 to 19 age group here, and we see we're calculating a figure of 62, that's 62.0. That is calculated by taking the number of births, which is 36,784, dividing by the population, female population, which is the 593,000 figure, and then multiplying by 1,000. Right, that's how we get the 62. So we've got the little formula there under the heading fertility rate, so you can reference this a little bit later on. So it's a pretty straightforward calculation. Just number of births divided by female population multiplied by 1,000. And you can see the numbers there in that table. They start off a little bit small, but then they gradually grow for 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and then they taper off, which is what we saw on those graphs in the previous slide. All right. So here we've got a question. This is the first question for the session. We're asking which country has the higher fertility. Now, firstly, I want to say, I mean, when I looked at this slide, that the table on the left was what I was presented, and I've reproduced it on the right, because when I saw this table, I didn't like it. And the reason I didn't like it, and this is a side part of this training, where we're teaching you how to sort of present and format tables as well as doing the same thing for graphs. But the table in the slide, they centered the numbers or the values under country A and country B, and had different number of decimal places for a couple of the numbers. So when you eyeball these numbers to try and interpret what this table's showing us, it becomes a little bit more difficult. It's not as easy to see the trend for the 2 countries or do a comparison between country A and country B. So what I did is I stuck another table on the right, and this is just something to keep in mind when you're producing tables. And there's also little tricks you need to adopt when you're producing graphs. And I emphasised this a lot last week, is make things as easy as possible for the person you're producing these tables and graphs for, so they can absorb the information in it. So just a couple of little simple tweaks to that table of right justifying those numbers in the second table and making sure the number of decimal places were the same. And the tweak I made there, I mean, the first number for country B, 27.24, it's the only number with two decimal places. So I just converted that to 1 decimal place in the second table. So it had the same number of decimal places. And the fourth number there, 189, was given, obviously that was 189.0, but they left out the 0.0. But that makes it harder to do an eyeball comparison to other numbers in the table. If some have no decimal places, others have 1, and others have 2. So it's very important to make it consistent and right justify, and then you can much more clearly see the patterns in the table if you tidy things up like that. So that's a little side issue that I sort of felt a need to share with you guys when I was going through these slides. So we're going to focus on the table on the right, which has been formatted a little bit to make it a little bit easier to understand. And the question is now, which country, looking at that data, so it's a list of age-specific fertility rates, which country has higher fertility? I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it. So what you want to do, have a look at the values for country A compared to country B, and then go down the different age groups. And are you able to tell which country has a higher fertility? And I'll get you, if you want to have a guess, the country, there's three options. You can say country A, country B, or not clear, unsure. And you can type that in the chat, and hopefully you'll get at least a cut. And don't worry, I'm not going to put you on the spot and get you to explain your answer. I'll just talk through the answer at the end. So, but if we can just have a couple of people just type some responses in the chat, that would be good. Oops. I didn't mean, I nearly jumped to the answer then. All right, so we've got a couple of answers here. Country B, not clear because we don't know the population. Another one for B. All right. So you're actually sort of both right. It is, and I'll jump to the, can I just confirm with someone, am I now on slideshow again? Anyone?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. All right, so it is actually country B, and the way we determine that, if you do calculate these age-specific fertility rates across the 7 age groupings and add them together, you come up with an overall aggregated value, and we're going to come back to this figure because it's going to help us measure the second indicator, which is the total fertility rate at the end. And that gives us a guide as to which country has a higher level of fertility than the other. But the reason why I think the answer is not sure is still an okay one, because without those totals there, if we're just looking at the values under each 5-year age group, it's not that clear to see. You've got to do the calculation of adding them in your head together. So both answers were correct. And if you look at them, it's what's interesting, this is not uncommon, by the way. I wouldn't be surprised if this is real data for a couple of different countries. But if you look at, say, country A compared to country B, the first 2 age groups, you'll notice that the values in country A are a lot higher than the values in country B. You've got 70.3 compared to 27.2, and you've got 203 compared to 135.5. Now, what that's saying is in country A, it's a lot more common for younger females to be giving birth to a child in those age groups. But then when you get down to the latter age groups, you'll see the numbers are actually higher for the older age groups. In fact, all remaining 5 age groups, it's actually country B is a higher value than country A. So, and that's not uncommon. I mean, you do have countries where, I mean, the more common age of giving birth has been getting older in recent times, but in some more developing countries, I mean, or less developed countries, there is still a high proportion of births taking place to people of young age groups. All right, so as we've already seen, I mean, typically these age-specific fertility rates, they do follow a standard sort of pattern. And You saw that in the earlier graph, and I'm going to take you through a couple more examples of graphs in a sec. But basically, they start off at 0 when you have very young ages, and particularly below 15, where it's very rare that a female under the age of 15 will give birth to a child. And then they rise until they peak somewhere around the age grouping where giving birth to a child is most common. And it's going to be in the 20s, but it's probably creeping up from low 20s to high 20s nowadays in many countries. And then you'll find that it then declines back to 0 or so again after the age of 50, where it's very rare that females 50 years and above will give birth to a child. And the variation in the pattern occurs due to those factors which we talked about early on. All right, so we're going to test our brains again, do a little bit more of an exercise. And the reason why I want to do this is because in your reports and your assignment work, hopefully as part of your assignment, you'll produce some age-specific fertility rates. And when you produce, and hopefully you do some graphs or tables, and what you need to do is you need to describe what those graphs and tables are showing us. So we're going to go through 2 different examples now. One is looking at age-specific fertility rates across 5 different countries. And the next one's going to be looking at just the one country, but for 4 different reference periods. So here we have a graph and it's showing the age-specific fertility rates for 5 countries. Now, my question to you, if you were to put this graph in your report and you were asked to write a little paragraph or 2 explaining what are some of the key features of this graph, what would you talk about? And this is an important part of this workshop, having this ability to not just produce the graphs and the tables, but being able to interpret what it is they're saying. So what I'll get you to do, once again in the chat, and just do a dot point or 2, what are some of the interesting features this graph is showing us about the age-specific fertility rates for these 5 countries? I'm hoping to get 2 or 3 interesting points from 2 or 3 different people. And as I said, I won't get you to explain them. I just want you to just have a think about it. Put yourself in the position that, okay, I've just produced this graph for my report, and now I'm been given the task, I've got to write a paragraph or 2 to the author of my report on what this graph is showing us. What are you going to say? Is the graph still showing, by the way?
Yep.
Yep, okay, good. Okay. So I noticed 1 participant's typing. Hopefully we'll have 2 or 3 people typing. Just have a go. All right, so we've got 1 comment. There's more fertility in the age of 20 to 24. Yep. Which country? Oh, let me just ask a couple of questions and then you can just type the answer. Which country seems to have the higher level of fertility? All right. Got 1 answer of Kenya. It's pretty good. Which country's got the lowest? Yep, I see China. Well done. A couple of people put that in. So when we're describing these graphs, start off with these broad sort of issues that you can see. And things like, as can be seen in this graph, Kenya has the highest levels of fertility for most of the age groups, especially from 15 to 19 through to 30 to 34. And it looks like China's got the lowest for pretty much all the age groups. Just those sort of broad descriptions, you can kick things off. What another thing that's a little bit interesting there, one country seems to peak at a different level to the others. Which ones, four of the countries have the highest rate for one age group and one country peaking at a different time. Which country is peaking at a different time? Okay, good. Seeing some answers coming in. So we've got an answer of India. It's exactly right. So what we see, if you look at the graphs for China, Haiti, Kenya and the US, their highest age-specific fertility rate occurs 25 to 29. Whereas for India, the 20 to 24 age groups quite a bit higher than 25 to 29. So what we can say there, as we're describing this graph, I mean, it's probably more common for younger females in India to be given birth in that age group 20 to 24 than what it is in some of the other countries. Although still in Kenya, it's still got a higher rate 20 to 24 than India. But that's not the peak for Kenya. Kenya still peaks at 25 to 29. But even just this one graph with 5 countries, there's a stack of stories you can tell with this particular graph. Anyone else want to? I see there's still some chatting going on. Yep, Haiti also peaks at 25 to 29, but it's just India that peaked at the 20 to 24 age group. Well, let's do something similar. I just need to go back. Let's look at another one. Here, hopefully I'm back on full slide. Here we've got a graph where we're just looking at the one country now, and this is Mexico. And what we're doing is we're looking at the age-specific fertility rates for Mexico for 4 different periods, 1980, 1990, 2000 and 2010. So if you were once again to describe what this graph's showing you, what sort of things might you say? I see a little bit of typing. Hopefully everyone can have a bit of a go. I mean, there's a couple of key things which we could sort of mention that this graph's showing us for Mexico. All right, I like that first input. Higher fertility rate in 1980, absolutely. I mean, for all of the age groups, the age-specific fertility rates are highest in 1980. So the blue line's always above, the light blue line, I think it's light blue. Yeah, the light blue line's always above for each of the different age groups. What else can you say? I mean, there's a bit of a trend here. So that's 100% correct. Higher fertility rate in 1980, but you also know that it drops off every 10 years. So you'll notice that in 1990, it's below 1980. In 2000, it's again below 1990. And then in 2010, it's dropped below 2000. So there's a common trend there that less and less births are taking place in Mexico every 10 years. But there's another little trend there, I think, which is a little bit interesting relating to what we spoke about on the last graph, and that's where it's peaking. Can you see a difference in peaks in 1980 and 1990 compared to 2000 and 2010? So you'll notice there in the blue and the red line that represent the earlier years, the higher fertility rate was noticed in 20 to 24 compared to 20 to 25. And that's switched around in the last two sets of years, in 2000 and 2010. The age-specific fertility rate for 25 to 29 was higher than in 20 to 24. So that's sort of suggesting that in this period that they're analysing, that people are more likely to have child in their later 20s and their earlier 20s. So I hope everyone can see that. So they're probably the two main bits of information to come out of those graphs. So that's the sort of thing when you're describing that graph that you want to sort of talk about. And this is a sort of a skill which doesn't come overnight. You just got to keep practicing this, and the team helping with this workshop over the next few weeks will help you with trying to resolve what a lot of these tables and graphs are showing you and help with the report writing part of the assignment. All right, I'll go back to the slides. All right, so I mentioned at the start we're going to look at two different indicators. So the first one was that age-specific fertility rate, and the other one is what we're referring to as the total fertility rate. So the age-specific fertility rates, they are good, but as we saw earlier, you know, when I was asking which country had a higher fertility rate than the other with both of the 7 age groupings, it wasn't that obvious. Yet some people guessed country B and they were correct. Others said, oh, you know, we might need a bit more information, which was also correct. So it wasn't that straightforward to say this country has a higher level of fertility than another country. And that's whether it be over time or whether it be comparing country to country. And the other thing with age-specific fertility rates, I mean, it generates numbers which to some people, or to a lot of people, don't necessarily make obvious sense. So we're producing numbers like 68.6 and 123.2. And we're asking ourselves, well, what does that mean? And you then have to explain, you know, how it's calculated for people to understand it. So it can be a little bit confusing when you're trying to use those numbers to explain the level of fertility for a particular country at a particular time. So what we do here, what the concept we're now going to introduce is what we call the total fertility rate. And what the total fertility rate is it's the average number of children a woman would give birth to in her lifetime if she was to pass through her childbearing years, which is 15 to 49, experiencing that present day age-specific fertility rate. All right, so what does that mean? If you come up with a total fertility rate of 2, that means you would expect a woman in that country at that point in time, going through that age period, 15 to 49, to have 2 children on average for that area. All right, so it's what's the likelihood of the number of children you're going to have in that country at that time point if you go through your child bearing years. And that's sort of a little bit of an easier figure to understand. So when a girl gets to 15, you can say, oh, listen, you're most likely going to have 2 children or 3 children. And the TFR is the figure that tells us that. So how do we calculate it? And it's basically, as I said earlier, I mean, the age-specific fertility rates are often done in 5-year age groups. So the TFR, if you've got 5-year age groups for your age-specific, it's calculated by adding up the age-specific fertility rates, and there'll be 7 of these numbers because there's 7 5-year age groupings between 15 to 49. Then you multiply this number or this sum by 5, and it's 5 because they're 5-year age groups, and then you divide by 1,000. All right, so the TFR is the sum of each of the 7 age-specific fertility rates multiplied by 5 and then divide by 1,000. So let's jump straight into the calculation. So I've got the same table that I had up a little bit earlier. So once again, we've got the 7 different 5-year age groups from 15 to 19 all the way down to 45 to 49. Then what we have is your female population and number of births. And from those 2 bits of information, we can calculate the age-specific fertility rate, which is the numbers on the right. All right, so as per the previous slide, all you do is you sum all those numbers up, all 7 of those numbers up, and that's where you get the 480.4. And then you multiply that number by 5 and divide by 1,000. All right, so we multiply it by 5 because each of the age groups over on the far left, they're 5-year age groups. All right, so 2.4 is the answer. So for this particular country, at this particular point in time, a woman is expected to give birth to 2.4 children in the period of 15 to 49. Okay, normally at this stage I look around the audience to see if I'm getting blank looks or people are nodding, but it's a bit hard with virtual training, but I assume this is okay. It's not too complex a thing. So if you just calculate the age-specific fertility rates, do it for the 7 age groups, add them together, multiply by 5 and divide by 1,000. All right, so already getting close to the end. The second last slide we're going to look at is, you remember last week we spent a little bit of time on, especially situations where you have small countries with not too many occurrences of events like births, and it's often a good thing to add a few years of data together. So what I want to do here, I mean, how do you calculate the age-specific fertility rate if you're adding a few years worth of data together? And so all you do here is you just calculate the average number of births to women in that age group, and then divide by the total women of that age group at the midpoint. All right, so we've got an example here. So we've got the period 2007 to 2011. So the average number of births here was 55 for the age group 20 to 24. Now the midpoint for 2007 to 2011 is July 1st, 2009. So we then go and get the figure of what is the total number of women at that particular time point. And if it's 300, for the age group 20 to 24, we can then calculate the age-specific fertility rate of taking the number of births for that group, the average number of births of 55, dividing by 300, which is the midpoint, and multiplying by 1,000. All right, so that's how we address age-specific fertility rates for aggregated data, where we're aggregating a few years together. And the last slide is teenage fertility rate. And this, hopefully, some of you will calculate in your project work. And the teenage fertility rate, it's basically the age-specific fertility rate for the age, or the bottom age group of 15 to 19. And it is an important indicator. It has high relevance to the SDGs. It does have an impact on trying to reduce mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, that is, which is one of the key goals of the SDGs. And it is as you can see, the bottom right, it is quite a problem in the Pacific. If you call it a problem, I would call it an issue that probably needs to be looked at, because the Pacific does have very high age-specific fertility rates compared to other parts of the world. So you've got some figures there. So for the Pacific, it's 61.3. And if you look at, other figures there, it's 48.3 for the world, and 52.3 for developing countries, and 23 for developed regions. So the Pacific's the highest out of all of those. So it's probably not ideal to be having high birth rates for 15 to 19-year-olds. So it is something that you probably want to produce, and something that needs to be looked at within your countries, within your health ministry. All right, so I think that's it. This is where I was going to hand over to Gloria, but she's not with us. But what she normally does at this stage is just goes through the assignment for the week. And no great surprise that the assignment's relating to you guys calculating your age-specific fertility rates and your total fertility rates, and not just producing those graphs or tables, but to write a little explanation about what they're showing us. And we spent a bit of time on a couple of graphs there to practice that a little bit. So that's all you have for your assignment this week. If you can get your data cleaned up and start moving on that, it's just going to be calculating those two different rates. All right. So as I said at the start, this is going to be a short session because we only had 15 slides, but we've gone through it all now. I can't think of anything else to add. So I just double check with my colleagues in Bangkok. Well, firstly, are there any questions about that session? And if not, we can start wrapping things up. But firstly, any questions? Okay, silence means no. I can't even see anyone typing. All right, well, I'll thank you very much for joining today. I'll hand back to David. It's always good to let David give the last cheerio for the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. So we'll, well, this is the end of the two modules on the birth and fertility statistics. And next week, we'll start the modules on the mortality. And we will have Lauren Moran from the Australian Bureau of Statistics leading the first two modules on the mortality statistics. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And in the meantime, we'll contact you to see whether you would like to have tutorials. I think it was RMI that they had a few questions, so we could have a tutorial with you and you could ask us your questions. So that's it for me. I don't know if Ulysse or Chloe, you would like to add something?
No, nothing.
No, I think you covered.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
So thank you very much for joining, and see you later this week or next week. And thank you, Chris, for the...
No worries. Thanks, David. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.